I was already late when my phone buzzed, vibrating against the passenger seat like it had something urgent to confess. I glanced at the screen while waiting at a red light. Unknown number, I ignored it. My daughter, Sophie, was humming softly in the backseat, swinging her legs, completely absorbed in the world of a 7-year-old who still believed mornings could be fixed with cereal and cartoons. "Mom," she said, "are we still going to Grandma's today?" "Yes," I replied automatically. The light turned green and I pulled forward, not knowing that the word yes was about to become complicated. The phone buzzed again. This time I answered. "Ms. Turner." A man's voice asked, "Yes." "This is the legal department for Hawthorne and Blake. We need to inform you that your presence is not required at today's family trust meeting." I frowned. "What meeting?" There was a pause. "The reading of your father's will," he said carefully. The road in front of me blurred. "My father died 3 days ago," I said. "No one told me about a meeting." "I'm sorry," he replied. "Your name was listed as excluded." The word hit harder than I expected. "Excluded." I repeated. "Yes," he said. "Your siblings requested that the meeting proceed without you." I hung up without responding. Sophie leaned forward slightly. "Mom, why are you quiet?" I swallowed. "Just thinking, baby." That morning, my father's death had already felt strange. Quiet, like something unfinished. We hadn't spoken in years, not really. Not since I became inconvenient. Not since I became a single mother. The trust meeting was happening without me, and I already knew why. I pulled into my mother's driveway anyway. Old habits die hard. The house looked exactly the same, white shutters. Perfect lawn, a place where appearances had always mattered more than comfort. Sophie jumped out of the car and ran toward the door. "Grandma," she shouted happily. My mother opened the door, smiling too quickly. "Oh," she said when she saw me. "You came?" "Yes," I replied. "We were invited for lunch." She hesitated, just a fraction of a second too long. "Of course," she said. "Come in." Inside, my brother Nathan and my sister Claire were already seated at the dining table. Papers were spread out in front of them. Legal papers. They looked up. Nathan's expression hardened immediately. "What are you doing here?" he asked. I set my bag down slowly. "Visiting my mother." I replied. "What are you doing?" Claire didn't meet my eyes. "The trust meeting already happened," she said. "There was no need for you to come." My chest tightened. "I'm his daughter," I said. "I had every need to be there." Nathan scoffed. "You walked away years ago." "No," I replied calmly. "I was pushed. That's not how Dad saw it," he said. Sophie climbed onto a chair, swinging her legs, completely unaware of the tension crackling around her. "Can I have juice?" she asked brightly. My mother rushed to the kitchen. "Of course, sweetheart." I looked at my siblings. "Why was I excluded?" I asked. Nathan leaned back in his chair. "Because you made choices." "So did you," I replied. "Your choices embarrassed him." Claire said quietly. There it was. I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, not shock, confirmation. "You mean Sophie," I said. Claire flinched. "You had a child out of wedlock." Nathan said bluntly. "Then you disappeared." Dad didn't want drama. I didn't disappear. I replied. "I raised my daughter and left the family," he snapped. "No," I said. I refused to hide. The room went silent. My mother returned with a glass of juice and placed it in front of Sophie, avoiding my gaze. "You should go," Nathan said. "Everything's settled." "What was settled?" I asked. He slid a document across the table. "The estate," he said. "The properties, the investments." I scanned the page. My name wasn't there. "Nothing. He left me nothing." I said, "That's not true." Claire said quickly, "You were given forgiveness." I laughed. "One sharp sound for what?" I asked, for disappointing him. Nathan replied. I stood slowly. "Let me be very clear," I said. "You didn't exclude me from a meeting. You exposed yourselves." Nathan smirked. "You don't have any claim." I met his eyes. "You're wrong," I said. "You just don't know it yet." Sophie looked up at me. "Mom, are we leaving?" Yes, I said gently. We are. As we walked toward the door, my mother finally spoke. You could have done things differently, she said. I turned. So could you, I replied, but only one of us chose love. We drove away in silence. At the next red light, Sophie reached forward and squeezed my hand. Are we in trouble? She asked. No, I said. We're just done pretending. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table and opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. Documents, contracts, emails. My father had taught me business before he decided I wasn't worth backing anymore. What he never knew was that I listened better than anyone else. I had invested quietly, I had partnered anonymously. And one of those investments was Hawthorne and Blake, the same firm that had just told me I was excluded. I picked up my phone and made one call. I want to activate my voting rights, I said calmly. The voice on the other end went silent. Yes, Ms. Turner, he said finally. We weren't expecting this. I know, I replied. That's the point. I looked at Sophie playing on the floor, laughing as she made her dolls talk to each other. They thought they erased me. They forgot something important. I don't disappear. I wait. The call ended, and for a long moment I stayed exactly where I was. My phone still pressed to my ear even though the line had gone dead. Sophie was on the living room floor, lining up her dolls like she was arranging a meeting of her own. She gave each one a turn to speak, nodding seriously as if their opinions mattered. I watched her and felt the familiar pull in my chest. This was why I never walked away completely, not from the world, not from responsibility, and certainly not from a fight I didn't start. By evening, my phone began to ring again. This time, the number wasn't unknown. Hawthorne and Blake. I answered calmly. Ms. Turner, the same voice said, no longer careful. There seems to be some confusion regarding your status. No, I replied. The confusion is yours. There was a pause. You hold a minority stake, he said. Voting rights at that level are typically passive. Typically, I agreed. But not in this case. I could almost hear him scanning files, clicking keys, retracing steps that should have been taken years ago. You acquired shares through a blind trust, he said slowly. Yes, I replied, and those shares converted when your firm absorbed Whitman Capital. Another pause. That gives you leverage, he admitted. It gives me a seat, I corrected, and I'd like to use it. What exactly are you asking for? He said. A copy of the trust documents, I replied, and the minutes from the meeting you excluded me from. Silence. I'll expect them by morning. I added. The line went quiet. Sophie looked up from her dolls. Mom, are we having spaghetti tonight? Yes, I said. With extra sauce. She smiled, satisfied. That night, after she fell asleep, I opened my laptop and began reviewing old records. Years of careful decisions, quiet moves made when I had no audience and no support. I had invested when no one thought it mattered. When my father cut me off emotionally, I cut him out of my financial future, not out of spite, out of survival. By morning, the documents arrived, and with them the truth. The trust my siblings had rushed to finalize wasn't airtight. Not legally, not ethically. They had relied on my absence, on my silence, on the assumption that I was still the woman they remembered apologetic, uncertain, easy to sideline. They were wrong. I read every line slowly, then I smiled. The next call I made was to my attorney. I want to contest the trust, I said. There was a brief pause. On what grounds? Conflict of interest. I replied, an unlawful exclusion of a beneficiary. You were named, she asked. In the original draft, I said, before my siblings amended it. Her tone sharpened. Send me everything. I already did, I replied. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. Sophie padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. Mom, she said sleepily, you didn't read me a story. I scooped her up and held her close. I'm sorry, I said. I got distracted. That's okay, she murmured. You're here. Yes, I was. The first legal notice hit my siblings 2 days later. Nathan called immediately. "What did you do?" he demanded. I asked questions. I replied, "You're dragging this out," he snapped. "Dad didn't want you involved." What Dad wanted, I said calmly, stopped mattering when the law became involved. "You're being vindictive," Claire said in the background. "No," I replied, "I'm being precise." There was shouting, accusations, threats. I listened quietly. When they ran out of words, I said one thing: "You should have invited me to the meeting." Then I hung up. Weeks passed. The estate entered probate review. Assets were frozen. My siblings' certainty cracked. My mother stopped calling entirely. Sophie noticed. "Grandma's quiet." She said one afternoon, "Yes." I replied, "She is. Did we do something wrong?" Sophie asked. I knelt in front of her. "No. Sometimes adults are quiet because they don't know how to talk yet." She thought about that. "Okay, children accept truth when it's offered gently." The hearing was scheduled for late spring. I walked into the courthouse alone. Nathan and Claire sat together across the room, tense, whispering. They looked shocked when I took my seat confidently. The judge reviewed the case calmly. Documents were presented, emails read aloud, drafts compared. It became clear quickly what had happened. My father had drafted the trust years earlier. I was included. After my daughter was born, amendments were made. I was removed. No explanation, no documentation of consent, no legal justification. The judge leaned back in his chair. "This raises concerns," he said. Nathan's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "This court will require a full review," the judge continued, "including testimony regarding intent." Claire's face went pale. Outside the courthouse, Nathan confronted me. "You're doing this for money." He accused. "No." I replied, "I'm doing this for the truth." "You don't even need it," he said. "You're fine. That's not the point." I replied, "What is the point then?" He demanded. I looked at him steadily. "You taught my daughter that love can be taken away." I said, "I'm teaching her it can't." He had no answer. The weeks before the hearing were exhausting, but they were also clarifying. People reached out, old contacts. Quiet allies, some apologized, others stayed silent. I didn't chase either. Sophie continued being a child. School projects, sleepovers, endless questions. One night as I tucked her in, she asked, "Why are you tired a lot?" I smiled softly. "Because I'm carrying something heavy." "Can I help?" she asked. I kissed her forehead. "You already are." On the day of the final hearing, my mother appeared unexpectedly. She sat behind my siblings, hands folded, eyes downcast. She didn't look at me. I didn't look at her. Testimony was given. The truth unfolded slowly, then all at once. My father's voice echoed through old emails, speaking of reputation and mistakes. The judge listened carefully. When it was my turn to speak, I stood calmly. "I didn't come here to punish anyone." I said, "I came here because exclusion should never be rewarded." The judge nodded. The ruling came 2 weeks later. The trust was invalidated. A new distribution was ordered based on the original draft. I was reinstated, not equal, but acknowledged. Nathan and Claire lost more than money that day. They lost certainty. And certainty, I've learned, is what people like them rely on most. When I told Sophie, she smiled. "Does that mean we won?" she asked. I considered it. "No." I said, "It means we were seen." She nodded, satisfied. That night, I sat alone on the porch and watched the sky darken. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. This wasn't about inheritance. It was about refusal, refusal to be erased, refusal to let my child grow up watching me accept less than I deserved. The fight wasn't over, but it had shifted, and for the first time since my father died, I felt something close to peace. The ruling changed more than the paperwork. It changed how people looked at me, not with warmth, not with admiration, with caution, the kind that comes when someone realizes the version of you they relied on no longer exists. Nathan stopped calling entirely. Claire tried once, left a voicemail that started with "I just think this has gone too far," and ended without saying anything meaningful. I didn't call her back. My mother, however, did something unexpected. She showed up, no warning, no call. Just her car pulling into my driveway on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, while Sophie was at school, and I was working at the kitchen table. I saw her through the window before she knocked. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home. Then I stood and opened the door. She looked smaller than I remembered. Older, her hair thinner, her posture less rigid, like she'd been carrying something heavy for too long. "Hello, Evelyn," she said softly. "Hello, Mom," I replied. She hesitated. "May I come in?" I stepped aside. She sat at the table where Sophie usually did her homework, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I didn't know how to talk to you," she said after a moment. "That's never stopped you before," I replied calmly. She flinched, then nodded. "Fair." She looked around the room. At the photos on the wall, at Sophie's backpack by the door. "She's happy," my mother said quietly. "Yes," I replied, "she is. I used to think happiness came from order," she said, "from rules, from things staying where they belonged. And now," I asked. She swallowed. "Now I think I confused control with love." I didn't respond. She continued, "Your father was afraid of what people would say, afraid of losing respect. And you chose his fear over your daughter." I said gently, "Yes." She whispered. Silence stretched between us. "I'm not here to argue," she said finally. "I'm here because I don't want to lose you." I studied her face. "You already did," I said. "You're just realizing it now." Tears filled her eyes. "Is there any way back?" I considered the question carefully. "For you?" I asked, "or for Sophie?" She didn't answer immediately. "For both," she said finally. "That depends," I replied, "on whether you're willing to stop pretending this was about inheritance." She nodded slowly. "It wasn't. It was about shame." "There it is," I said. She pressed her lips together. "I'm ashamed of what I allowed." I sighed. "Then start by telling the truth." She nodded again. When Sophie came home from school that afternoon, she froze when she saw my mother. "Grandma?" she asked uncertainly. My mother stood quickly. "Hello, sweetheart." Sophie looked at me. I nodded once. She walked forward and accepted the hug, though it was brief. "Do you want to see my drawing?" Sophie asked politely. "I'd love to," my mother replied, voice trembling. They sat on the floor together, heads bent close. I watched quietly. This wasn't forgiveness. It was a beginning. The weeks that followed were strange. My mother tried awkwardly, carefully. She came to Sophie's school play and sat in the back. She brought snacks. She listened more than she spoke. I didn't praise her. I observed. Nathan did not try. Claire did once more. She invited me to coffee. "I think we all made mistakes," she said, stirring her cup without looking at me. "Yes," I replied, "but dragging this through court was necessary." I interrupted. "You could have handled it privately," she said. "You could have treated me like family," I replied. She looked up then, frustration flashing. "You're acting like a victim." "No," I said calmly. "I'm acting like a witness." She scoffed. "To what?" "To who you chose to be," I replied. She stood abruptly. "I hope it was worth it." "It already is," I said. She left without another word. Life settled into a new rhythm. The estate matters continued, but they no longer consumed me. I focused on work, on Sophie, on the quiet rebuilding of something honest. One evening, Sophie asked, "Why doesn't Uncle Nathan come anymore?" I took a breath. "Because he's still learning how to be kind." She nodded. "That takes time." "Yes," I said, "sometimes more than we want." Sophie grew more aware as she got older. She noticed tension, absence, the way adults avoided certain topics, but she never felt unsure of her place. That was the difference. One night, while brushing her teeth, she asked, "Mom, why did Grandpa stop loving you?" I paused. "He didn't stop loving me," I said carefully. "He stopped knowing how." She considered that. "That's sad." "Yes," I replied. "It is." She rinsed her mouth and hugged me tightly. "I know how," she said. I held her close. That was enough. The final settlement came quietly. No celebration, no apology. just paperwork confirming what had already been decided. I put the documents away and didn't look at them again. The inheritance didn't change our lives. It changed the story. We were no longer the ones who were left out. We were the ones who refused to leave. Months later, Sophie's school held a family day. Parents, grandparents, siblings, my mother came, Nathan did not. Claire sent a gift. Sophie ran between tables, laughing freely. A teacher leaned toward me and said, "She's very confident. She knows she's wanted." I replied, that was the truth. One evening after Sophie was asleep, my mother sat with me on the porch. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just want to be better, then be consistent." I replied, "That's all that matters." She nodded. "I will try." I believed her, not because she said it, because she stayed. The story people told about our family began to shift. Not dramatically, subtly. I didn't correct anyone. I let my life speak. That's when I realized something important. Revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like survival, done so well it rewrites the narrative. And that was something no one could take from us. The years that followed didn't rush. They unfolded steadily, like pages turning at their own pace, no longer driven by crisis or conflict, but by intention. Sophie grew into herself, not loudly, not rebelliously, confidently. She learned early that her voice mattered, not because it demanded attention, but because it carried truth. She questioned rules that didn't make sense. She walked away from people who mistook cruelty for humor. She chose kindness without letting it turn into weakness. Watching her was like watching a future I'd once been told was impossible. My mother became a quiet presence in our lives, not intrusive, not performative. She showed up when she said she would. She listened when Sophie spoke. She corrected herself when old habits crept in. Trust rebuilt itself slowly. Brick by brick, Nathan remained distant. Occasionally, his name surfaced through mutual acquaintances. Business struggles, a failed venture, a move out of state, I felt no satisfaction in it, only distance. Claire hovered on the edges. She sent birthday cards, polite messages, nothing more. I accepted them as they were. No more, no less. The absence of conflict created space for clarity. I changed jobs by choice this time. Took a leadership role in a firm that valued transparency over loyalty theater. I didn't hide my history. I didn't lead with it either. People respected me not because I fought, but because I knew when to stop. Sophie turned 10. At her birthday party, surrounded by friends, my mother pulled me aside. "You did something remarkable," she said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. "I baked a cake." She smiled sadly. "You broke a cycle." I thought about that long after the party ended. Cycles aren't broken by confrontation alone. They're broken by consistency. One evening, Sophie and I sat on the couch watching a documentary about families. She frowned. "Why do people stay where they're not happy?" I considered the question. "Sometimes," I said, "they confuse familiarity with safety." She nodded. "That's silly, yes," I replied. "It is." When Sophie left for middle school, then high school, then college, each transition felt lighter than the last. She carried herself with certainty, not arrogance, certainty. On the day she left for college, she hugged me tightly. "You taught me how to stand," she said. I smiled. "You taught me why." We stayed close, but not dependent. She built her own world. I watched from a distance that felt healthy. One winter afternoon, years later, I received a letter. Handwritten from Nathan. I read it once, then twice. It was an apology, not a perfect one, but an honest one. He acknowledged his choices, his fear, his resentment. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for understanding. I folded the letter and put it away. I didn't respond immediately. Some apologies need time to mature. Sophie called me that night. "Mom," she said, "do you ever regret standing up?" I smiled. "No." "Even when it cost you?" she asked. "Especially then. I replied. She laughed softly. Good. Years later, Sophie stood in front of her own audience. Not because she wanted attention, because she had something to say. I sat in the back, listening. She spoke about integrity, about choice, about how silence can shape a life just as much as words. She never mentioned names. She didn't need to. Afterward, she found me in the crowd. "You okay?" she asked. "I've never been better," I replied. On the drive home, I thought about the moment everything changed. The phone call, the exclusion, the decision to stop shrinking. I hadn't set out to teach a lesson. I had set a boundary. And boundaries, I learned, have a way of teaching on their own. The house felt quiet again when Sophie moved away. But it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. I poured a cup of tea and sat at the same kitchen table where so many choices had been made. I thought about legacy, not money, not reputation, but permission. Permission to exist fully, to refuse erasure, to choose truth over comfort. That was what I left behind, not an inheritance, a standard, and that I knew would outlive me. The story didn't end with applause. It ended with a woman who refused to disappear, and a daughter who never learned how. That was enough, always.